The wind swept across the fields of Domremy with a soft whisper, rustling the tall grasses and caressing the old oaks that marked the edge of the tiny village. The wooden and stone houses clustered shyly under a vast sky where each star shone like a secret kept since ancient times. It was the late 14th century, and France, wounded by the 100 Years' War, seemed like a kingdom abandoned by hope. Yet, in that remote corner where the nights were long and the days of labor heavy, heaven was preparing something extraordinary. Joan, a dark-haired girl with a bright gaze, ran barefoot along the dirt paths, her feet dusty, her cheeks flushed from exertion. Barely 13 years old, her life was marked by the simple rhythm of the countryside, milking cows, the rooster's crow at dawn, the church bells calling to prayer. Her mother, Isabelle, gently taught her to pray, while her father, Jacques, worked the fields, sweat beading on his brow. Everything seemed destined to always stay the same, until one summer night, when the moon was full and the stars fell from the sky like silver tears, the voice of the divine broke the silence. Joan was alone, kneeling beside the village's small chapel, her fingers intertwined in prayer. The air was warm, scented with wild herbs, and the crickets sang their nightly song. It was then that a radiance filled her vision, and an angel, clothed in light, appeared before her. Her heart leapt and sacred words filled the space. "Joan, beloved daughter of God, you are called to lift France from its misery." The young girl's knees trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Me, Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How can I, a simple peasant girl, save a kingdom?" The radiant figure smiled, and the whisper of wings filled the night. "Do not be afraid, maiden. You have been chosen." From that moment on, Joan's heart changed, her childish laughter mixed with the weight of a destiny she was only beginning to grasp. Each morning when she awoke, she felt heaven's words burning in her chest, and each night, as she looked at the stars, she wondered when her mission would begin. Days passed, and life in Domremy went on. The farm work, the prayers at church, the distant rumors of war. But in Joan's soul, the voices from heaven grew stronger, more insistent. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret visited her in dreams and visions, urging her to persevere, to prepare. Her nights of prayer grew longer, and in the sunlit golden fields, Joan walked with her head bowed, speaking silently to her God. One afternoon, as she helped her father in the fields, Jacques watched her carefully. "Joan, my daughter, what's troubling you?" he asked in a grave voice. She lifted her eyes, shining with emotion. "Father, I feel that God is calling me to something great." Jacques frowned, puzzled, but Isabelle, listening from the doorway, narrowed her eyes, sensing that something sacred surrounded her daughter. This is how the story began. The story of the Maid of Orléans, the young peasant girl who, armed with armor and a banner, would defy kings and armies, carrying with her the fire of an unshakable faith. This is the story of Joan of Arc, Virgin of France, sent by heaven to change the course of history. The nights in Domremy were long and quiet, under a blanket of stars that seemed to stretch into infinity. Joan, still just a child, would often sit at her doorstep, hugging her knees as she gazed up at the star-filled sky. She listened to the distant hoot of an owl and the soft murmur of the Meuse River, whose waters bordered the fields where her father, Jacques d'Arc, worked tirelessly from dawn. Inside, her mother, Isabelle, sat by the fire weaving, occasionally casting tender glances toward her daughter. "Joan, come inside. The night air chills the bones," her mother called gently. Joan smiled but lingered a few more moments, as if her eyes were searching the heavens for answers. From a young age, she had felt an unexplainable longing deep within, a yearning for something greater than the simple life of the countryside, something deeper than the daily tasks of milking cows and gathering firewood. "Mama, does God hear us?" she suddenly asked, her voice curious. Isabel smiled, stroking her daughter's dark hair. "Of course, my little one. He always hears us." And with that certainty, Joan filled her small heart with prayers, whispering to God softly as she helped her family. In the village church, she knelt devoutly, clasping her hands with fervor as Father Guillaume recited the scriptures. Unlike the other children who fidgeted and squirmed, Joan remained still, her eyes closed, her face illuminated by faith. As she grew, the war ravaging France began to brush against the edges of her world. Tales of villages sacked by the Burgundians, rumors of betrayals and French defeats reached her family's ears, sowing worry. Jacques furrowed his brow each time someone brought news from the front. "Those cursed English and their allies," he grumbled, sharpening his knife. But Joan didn't feel just fear. Inside her, something burned, something she couldn't explain. It was a calling, a whisper that seemed to grow louder every time she heard about her suffering homeland. Deep in her chest, she felt a voice saying, "France has not been forgotten." One afternoon, while tending the sheep in the fields, Joan wandered beneath a great oak and knelt to pray. She closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face, and felt an unusual peace. Suddenly, a brilliant light filled the space. When she opened her eyes, she saw before her a radiant figure with golden wings and a serene face, the Archangel Michael. "Joan, little one of God." The angel spoke, his voice firm yet loving. "You will be the savior of France." Joan was left breathless, her hands trembling, her eyes wide. "Me?" she whispered, incredulous. "How could I ever do such a thing?" The archangel smiled, tilting his head gently. "God has chosen you, maiden. Keep this in your heart and wait for the instructions to come." The vision faded, leaving Joan shaking and full of wonder. For days, she spoke to no one of what she had seen, guarding the secret like a precious treasure, but the voices soon returned. St. Catherine and St. Margaret, with faces full of tenderness, appeared to her in dreams, speaking of her mission, preparing her for what was to come. In the nights that followed, Joan walked through the fields, gazing at the stars with a restless heart. "Lord," she prayed softly, "I am only a peasant girl. How can I save my kingdom?" The words of the saints echoed in her mind. God does not look at the strength of men, but at the purity of the heart. Joan was beginning to understand that her life was destined for something greater, something calling her from above. One afternoon, as she fetched water from the well, her brother Pierre watched her curiously. "Joan, you've been so quiet lately. Is something wrong?" She smiled at him sweetly, hiding her secret. "Nothing, Pierre. I'm just thinking about France and how much I wish for peace." Pierre, innocent, threw an arm around her shoulders. "You're strange, sister. No other girl in the village thinks about such things." Joan let out a brief giggle, but in her heart, she knew the day would come when she would have to leave behind Domremy, its fields, her family, and fulfill what heaven was asking of her. Under the stars each night, she knelt and prayed, "Give me strength, Lord, to do your will." And so passed the days of her childhood, between prayers, humble chores, and visions that slowly shaped the heart of the maiden who, though she did not yet fully realize it, was destined to become the savior of France. Winter had settled over Domremy, covering the fields in frost and painting the skies a dull gray. Chimneys smoked from early morning, and the villagers huddled inside their homes to shield themselves from the icy wind. Joan, now 14 years old, sat beside the hearth helping her mother mend clothes, quietly listening as her father and brothers discussed the grim news arriving from the battlefield. "They say Orléans is under siege," Jacques murmured, his brow deeply furrowed. "If it falls, there'll be nothing left of France. Pierre, her brother, sighed heavily. And the Dauphin? What's he doing? Doesn't he plan to fight back? Joan clenched her hands in her lap. She knew what heaven had told her. She was to go to the Dauphin, Charles, and help him reclaim his throne. But how could she, a mere peasant girl, achieve such a thing? Doubts tormented her each night, while the heavenly voices grew more insistent, firmer with each passing day. One night, unable to sleep, Joan slipped outside into the cold yard and gazed up at the star-filled sky. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of snow under her feet. She knelt down, clasped her hands, and with tears in her eyes whispered, "Lord, why me? I am just a girl. How can I help save France?" At that moment, a soft light enveloped her, and the familiar figure of the Archangel Michael appeared before her, radiant and mighty. At his side stood Saints Catherine and Margaret, their gazes filled with tenderness. "Joan, it is time to act," Michael said in a firm voice. "You must go to the Dauphin and tell him heaven has chosen him to be king. You will lead him to victory." Joan felt her legs buckle beneath her. "Me? How could I ever present myself before the Dauphin? I have no weapons, no riches, no name. No one will listen to me." Saint Catherine leaned toward her, offering a gentle smile. "God does not choose the powerful, Joan, but the pure of heart. Your faith will move mountains, and your banner will be stronger than any sword." Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks as her heart pounded. She understood that she could wait no longer. She had to act. The next day, Joan gathered the courage to speak with her uncle, Durand Laxart, a simple but respected man in the region. In the kitchen as they broke bread, she looked at him with determination. "Uncle, I need to go to Vaucouleurs. There I can speak with Captain Robert de Baudricourt. He can help me reach the Dauphin." Durand looked at her, surprised, setting his knife aside. "To Vaucouleurs? And why would you want to go there, Joan?" She took a deep breath, lowering her voice. "I have received a call from heaven. I must help save France." The man frowned, scratching his beard. "Joan, child, you're a peasant girl. Those things are not for someone like you." But Joan did not waver. She lifted her chin, her eyes shining. "Uncle, God has chosen me. I cannot disobey him." Her uncle sighed, surrendering to the young girl's determination. "Very well. I'll take you to Vaucouleurs, but I can't promise that Captain will listen to you." And so, Joan left Domremy, leaving behind her family and home, riding a borrowed horse and wrapped in a simple cloak. The journey to Vaucouleurs was not easy. The roads were snowy, and rumors of bandits and soldiers prowling made travelers wary. But Joan advanced without fear, her gaze fixed on a destiny that, though uncertain, was written by heaven. Upon reaching the fortress of Vaucouleurs, she presented herself before Robert de Baudricourt, a stern and skeptical man. The captain looked her up and down, arching a brow. "You? A peasant girl who says she can save France?" he scoffed, crossing his arms. "Go home, girl." But Joan didn't flinch. With a firm voice, she told him, "Captain, if you do not help me, France will be destroyed. But if you send me to the Dauphin, I will show you that it is God who sends me." Intrigued by the young girl's courage, Baudricourt decided to observe her for a few days. Soon rumors spread about the strange maiden who prayed day and night, who spoke with unshakable conviction, and who had accurately predicted a nearby victory of the Dauphin's forces. Finally, the captain gave in. "Very well, girl. I will send you with a small escort to Chinon. But be careful. The roads are dangerous and the journey is long." Joan bowed her head, grateful. "Thank you, Captain. I trust that God will protect me." That night, before setting off, Joan knelt once more, gazing up at the clear sky. "Lord, I am weak, but you are strong. Give me the courage to fulfill your will." The stars twinkled above her, as if each one whispered, "Do not fear, maiden. Heaven walks with you." The journey to Chinon was long and perilous. The French roads, scarred by the footprints of war, were filled with wandering soldiers, bandits, and desperate villagers. Joan, wrapped in her cloak and riding the borrowed horse, led her small escort through shadowy forests and across rushing rivers. Every step brought her closer to the heart of history, to the court of the Dauphin Charles, the man she was meant to crown as king. At night, while they took shelter in humble inns or beneath bare trees, Joan prayed softly. Her travel companions, rough soldiers, had at first mocked her. "Do you really think a peasant girl can save France?" one had asked, laughing under his breath. But as the days passed, something in Joan's determination began to touch their hearts. They saw her kneeling under the starlight, praying with tears in her eyes, speaking with a fervor that seemed to come from another world. "It's not us protecting her," one man whispered to another. "It's her guiding us." When they finally arrived at Chinon, the tall walls of the castle loomed like stone giants against the gray sky. News of a young peasant girl claiming to be sent by God had spread quickly, filling the court with murmurs and laughter. Joan was led before the Dauphin, Charles VII, a young man with a serious face and cautious eyes. To test her, Charles arranged a small trick. He hid among his courtiers, leaving another man to sit on the throne. Joan, upon entering the throne room, advanced without hesitation. Her eyes, glowing with intense light, swept across the hall, ignoring the man on the throne and walking directly to Charles, hidden among his men. She knelt before him. "My Lord Dauphin, I have come on behalf of God to tell you that you must claim your throne and save France," she declared firmly. A murmur rippled through the room. Charles looked at her in astonishment. "How did you know who I was?" he asked, intrigued. Joan smiled faintly. "Heaven showed me. God sends me to lead you to Reims and crown you king." Caught between doubt and fascination, Charles ordered that Joan be examined by theologians and advisors. For days, she was interrogated relentlessly, but her simplicity and deep faith disarmed everyone. Even the most skeptical began to yield before her conviction. One night in private, Charles summoned Joan to his chambers. He was alone, sitting by the fireplace, his face bathed in the flickering glow of the flames. "Maiden," he said softly, "do you truly believe I can be king? France is broken. Orléans is under siege. Even my own allies doubt me." Joan approached slowly, her light armor reflecting the flicker of the fire. "My lord, it's not a matter of what you believe, but of what God has willed. He has chosen you, and I am here to help you fulfill your destiny." Charles lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I am afraid, Joan." She tilted her head, smiling gently. "So am I, my lord. But heaven asks us to move forward even with fear." The next day, plans were prepared to send Joan to Orléans. She was given a white suit of armor, a banner embroidered in gold with the names of Jesus and Mary, and a small army. As Joan mounted her horse, the soldiers watched in amazement. She was barely more than a girl, but she radiated an authority that filled them with hope. Before she departed, Charles approached and took her hand. "Will you return to me, Joan?" She looked him in the eyes and with a firm voice replied, "I will, and I will see you crowned king at Reims. It is heaven's promise." As she rode toward the horizon, banners fluttering in the wind and armor gleaming under the afternoon sun, Joan of Arc set out to fulfill the most improbable mission in French history, to liberate Orléans and lead the Dauphin to the throne. And so, the warrior maiden advanced, carrying on her shoulders not just the fate of a king, but of an entire nation. The walls of Orléans stood dark and battered under a stormy sky. The city, besieged for months by English troops, seemed on the verge of collapse. Enemy flags waved atop conquered towers, and within the city, the faces of the people were marked by hunger and despair. But everything changed the day news spread like a bolt of hope. A maiden, sent by God, was marching toward them at the head of an army. Joan, dressed in white armor, rode a black steed that moved steadily along the muddy road. By her side rode Jean de Metz, Gilles de Rais, and other captains, but without exception, they all looked to her for direction. Her banner flew high, embroidered with golden lilies, and the name of Jesus shone under the gray skies. As they rode, Joan whispered a silent prayer. "Lord, strengthen my hands. Let my sword never strike out of hatred, but only for justice." Upon reaching the gates of Orléans, the French soldiers greeted them with disbelief. "That's the maiden?" some murmured, pointing to the dark-haired girl who dismounted with agility. "A peasant girl will save the city," others scoffed, skeptical. Joan looked at them firmly, her clear voice breaking through the murmurs. "Brothers, it is not I who will save you, but the Lord, but he has chosen to act through me. Lift your hearts and prepare to fight." That night, Joan walked the ramparts, speaking with the soldiers, blessing the wounded, praying with the villagers. Wherever she passed, she left behind a trail of hope. An old soldier, his face hardened by many campaigns, knelt before her. "Maiden, do you truly believe we can win?" Joan took his hands gently. "I don't just believe, I know we will." At dawn, the attack began. Joan, at the head of the army, carried her banner in one hand and her sword in the other. The sunlight broke through the clouds as the French advanced against the English fortifications. Arrows hissed through the air, spears clashed, war drums thundered. And in the midst of it all, Joan's figure shone like a beacon. "Forward, sons of France!" she cried, her voice clear above the roar. "The Lord has delivered Orléans into our hands." At a critical moment, an arrow struck her shoulder. The soldiers shouted in terror as they saw her fall, but Joan, biting through the pain, slowly rose. Her pale face was covered in sweat, but her gaze burned like fire. "Do not fear," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Go back to the fight. Victory is near." The maiden's courage lit a fire in their hearts. The French charged with renewed fury, and by nightfall, the bells rang out across the city. The English had been defeated. Orléans was free. The streets filled with cheers, tears, and embraces. Joan, exhausted, knelt in the central square, lifting her hands to the sky. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered through sobs. "Not for me, but for my people." The next day, while the captains celebrated, Joan approached Jean de Metz and Gilles de Rais. "We are not finished," she said softly. "The Dauphin must go to Reims and be crowned king. That is heaven's will." Jean de Metz nodded, amazed. "Joan, where do you find this strength?" The maiden smiled, tired but radiant. "It's not mine, Jean. It's God's." Thus, after the liberation of Orléans, the warrior maiden did not rest. She mounted her horse once more, her banner waving in the wind, guiding the Dauphin Charles toward Reims. The villages, the cities, the armies, all made way for the girl who seemed to have one foot on earth and the other in heaven. And as she advanced, Joan thought of her home, of Domremy, of the starry nights, of the heavenly voices that had called her, and she knew deep within her heart that much work still lay ahead. The sun bathed the vast plain in golden light as Joan rode at the front of the procession, her white and blue banner gleaming under the soft June breeze. They had left behind liberated cities, villages that welcomed them with tears of gratitude, and camps where rugged soldiers knelt to kiss the hem of her banner. Now before them rose the walls of Reims, the sacred city where the kings of France were crowned. Beside her, the Dauphin Charles rode silently, his face pale and anxious, his eyes fixed on the cathedral towers. Joan glanced at him, sensing his doubts, his fears, his exhaustion. "My lord," she said softly, "are you afraid?" Charles turned his face toward her, trying to manage a smile. "Joan, I've dreamed of this moment all my life, but now that it's so close, I fear I'm not worthy." She gently lowered her head. "It is not you who will crown yourself, my lord, but God. Trust in him." As they entered Reims, the bells rang out joyfully. Citizens poured into the streets, tossing flowers, shouting cheers. Men, women, elders, children, all wanted to see the maiden who had saved France. But Joan barely noticed the ovations. Her gaze was fixed on the majestic cathedral before them, a beacon of stone and light. The day of the coronation dawned radiant. Inside the cathedral, incense floated in the air. Stained glass cast colored reflections on the walls, and the clergy murmured solemn prayers. Joan, clad in her shining armor, knelt silently near the altar. As the archbishop anointed the Dauphin with sacred oil, her lips moved in a quiet prayer. "Lord, let your will be done today. May this king rule with justice, and if it is your will, may I return home." The words echoed in her heart as Charles approached the throne. Nobles knelt, and the crowd erupted in acclamation. "Vive le roi! Long live Charles VII, King of France!" Charles, now crowned, turned to Joan, his eyes filled with tears. "Maiden," he whispered, "thank you. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Joan smiled, bowing her head slightly. "It's not me, my lord. It is the Lord who has brought you here." When the ceremony ended and the crowd filled the square outside, Joan slipped away quietly. She climbed to the top of a tower and gazed out at the city glowing under the golden afternoon light. For a moment, a wave of longing swept over her. She thought of her home in Domremy, of her mother, of the green fields of her childhood. Jean de Metz found her there, silent, her gaze lost on the horizon. "Joan, why do you stand apart from the celebration?" he asked gently. She turned her face, offering a faint smile. "Because I know this is not the end, Jean. We've reached the summit, yes, but now the true test begins." He frowned, concerned. "What do you mean?" Joan sighed, looking out at the horizon. "The enemy has not been fully defeated. New battles will come, new betrayals. And I sense I will not return home." Jean gently took her arm. "Don't say such things, Joan. You are the heroine of France." She looked at him with immense tenderness. "Jean, I am only God's servant, and he has his plans." That night, as torches lit the streets of Reims and soldiers drank and laughed, Joan withdrew to her small room. There, kneeling by the open window, she lifted her eyes to the starry sky. "Lord," she whispered, "thank you for allowing me to come this far. If you still need me, guide me. If my time is ending, hold my spirit. I have given everything for you and for France." The moon shone high, bathing the maiden's figure in its silver light, as she, with a heart full of faith, prepared to face the shadows that were already beginning to gather beyond the city walls. The cold wind swept across the fields of Compiègne, making the war banners in the distance flutter like trembling ghosts. After the glory of Reims, after the victories that had filled a broken country with hope, Joan now advanced toward new battles. But her heart felt a strange weight, as if heaven were whispering that the shadows were drawing closer. Inside her tent, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, Joan knelt with her eyes closed, her hands clasped in fervent prayer. "Lord," she murmured, her voice barely trembling, "until now, you have guided me, upheld me in victory. If the time of trial has come, Give me strength to face it." Outside, the army was preparing for defense. The Burgundian forces, allies of the English, advanced relentlessly, and the walls of Compiègne looked more fragile by the hour under siege. Joan, pulling on her armor and seizing her banner, stepped into the square where the captains waited. Jean de Metz watched her, frowning. "Joan, this battle is dangerous. Many of our men are losing heart. Even the nobles are beginning to murmur." She lifted her head, her voice calm. "It doesn't matter how many doubt, Jean. I must be there, with my people." At dawn, Joan led an assault to break through and relieve the besieged. Arrows hissed through the air, hooves clattered on the stones, and Joan's banner flew at the front like a beacon of courage. But something in the air was different that day. Amid the chaos, as Burgundian reinforcements arrived unexpectedly, the French soldiers began to retreat. "Hold fast! Do not fear!" Joan cried, her voice rising above the clash of battle. But it was too late. A group of men surrounded her, pulling her from her horse. Jean de Luxembourg, a Burgundian noble, looked at her with a mix of surprise and respect. "So, you're the maiden," he said gravely. "France has trembled for you, and now you are in our hands." Bound and pushed along, Joan was taken away from the battlefield. As the gates of Compiègne closed, leaving the maiden at the mercy of her enemies, Joan cast one last glance at the city walls. A tear slid down her cheek. "Lord, may your will be done." The days that followed were a chain of humiliations. Sold by the Burgundians to the English for a sum of money, she was taken to Rouen, where a tribunal awaited, determined not only to break her body, but to crush her legend. During the journey, shackled and under guard, Joan prayed silently, her eyes fixed on the horizon. One night, a young English soldier approached her, intrigued by her quietness. "Why don't you scream? Why don't you beg?" Joan lifted her gaze, offering a faint smile. "Because I do not fear men. My soul belongs to God." The soldier, moved, stepped back, unable to reply. Upon arrival in Rouen, she was thrown into a damp, dark cell, where the cold seeped into her bones. The inquisitorial trial would begin soon, and Joan knew they did not seek justice. They sought her destruction. Yet each night, kneeling on the stone floor, she whispered the same prayer. "Lord, do not abandon me. If this is the cup I must drink, help me hold it." Meanwhile, in the court of Charles VII, the king Joan had crowned, there was only silence. No ransom, no negotiations, no gesture. Joan knew she had been betrayed, forgotten by those she had led to glory. One day, as the jailers led her to the tribunal, Joan crossed paths with a group of villagers who looked at her with pity. A woman, cradling a child, whispered as she passed, "Maiden, don't forget us." Joan gave her a brief, tender smile. "I will not forget you, neither in life nor in death." And so, the Maid of Orleans, captured and in chains, walked toward her trial, knowing that each step she took was also a step toward eternity. In her heart burned an unshakable faith, and though the prison walls tried to smother her, Joan kept her head high, trusting not in men, but in heaven. The courtroom in Rouen was cold and somber, lit only by a few torches casting flickering shadows along the stone walls. Joan, in chains, sat alone before a panel of stern-faced judges. Among them was Bishop Pierre Cauchon, who, under the mask of piety, skillfully wove the net of accusations meant to crush the Maid of Orleans. "Joan of Arc," Cauchon declared, his voice heavy with authority, "you are charged with heresy, with witchcraft, with dressing as a man, and with deceiving the people of France by claiming you acted in God's name. How do you plead?" Joan, pale but composed, lifted her head. Her eyes shone with a mix of exhaustion and unbreakable fire. "I am guilty of none of what you say. All I have done by the command of my Lord." The judges exchanged glances, some mocking, others uneasy. For weeks they interrogated her relentlessly, trying to confuse her, to trap her with theological tricks. But Joan, the peasant girl, answered with a wisdom that disarmed even the learned scholars. "Do you claim to be in God's grace?" they asked one day, hoping to catch her in error. Joan smiled softly. "If I am not, may God place me there. If I am, may God keep me there." Her words left the room in stunned silence. Meanwhile, in the lonely nights of her cell, Joan prayed in whispers, her tears falling quietly. "Lord, I feel alone, abandoned by men. But I know you are with me. Do not let my faith waver. Do not let me deny you." One morning, when the guards came for her, she knew the final hour had arrived. She was led to the marketplace, where a great crowd had gathered. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others out of devotion, others simply out of fear. In the crowd, Joan spotted an old woman weeping silently, a child who gave her a small farewell gesture, a young soldier who looked away, his face hardened. At the foot of the stake, the executioner trembled as he prepared for his duty. "Forgive me, maid," he murmured. Joan looked at him tenderly. "Do not be afraid, do what you must." The judges read the sentence, their words echoing between the smoke and the murmurs of the crowd. Joan was bound to the stake, her tattered banner at her feet. With her head held high, she raised her voice, clear and steady. "Jesus! Jesus!" The flames began to rise, crackling through the dry wood. Smoke wrapped around her figure, and even then, her voice could be heard. "Jesus!" A witness, an English soldier, would later fall to his knees, whispering, "We have burned a saint." When the fire died down and the air was filled with floating ash, the crowd remained in silence. Some wept openly. Others held their grief deep within. Years later, when the rehabilitation process began, the voices that had once been silenced rose up to testify. The maid had been innocent, her faith had been pure, her sacrifice had not been in vain. But in that moment, as her spirit ascended, Joan of Arc knew a higher truth. Her mission, her offering, her life, it all belonged to God. And in that eternal embrace, she finally found peace. The name of Joan was not extinguished in the flames. It became a living flame, a memory, a banner, a prayer. And ever since, whenever France cries out for hope, whenever a woman raises her voice for justice, whenever the weak challenge, the powerful with the strength of their faith, the spirit of Joan of Arc rises again, lighting the hearts of those who refuse to give up. The wind gently brushed over the fields of Domremy, where it had all begun. Wildflowers swayed under the sun, the old trees whispered ancient songs, and the Meuse River continued its course, indifferent to the passing of time. There, in that simple and remote corner of France, Joan's memory lived like a whisper among the leaves, like a star that never went out. Decades after her martyrdom, when the dust of history began to settle, the voices that had once been silenced rose up. King Charles VII, the very man whom Joan had helped bring to the throne, allowed the reopening of the trial that had condemned her. Witnesses came from all corners, soldiers, peasants, captains, even clerics. All spoke of her courage, her burning faith, the purity of her mission. She was a saint, one declared, tears in his eyes, a messenger sent from heaven. The retrial officially rehabilitated her, declaring her innocent and condemning the injustices that had led her to the stake. But by then, Joan no longer needed human defenders. Her name had already been engraved in the hearts of her people, in legends, in prayers. Centuries later, in 1920, the Church officially canonized her as a saint, confirming what so many had long known in their hearts. Today, Joan of Arc is more than just a name in history books. She is the symbol of unbreakable faith, of courage that defies chains, of the small voice that dares to stand against empires. She is the patroness of France, the maiden of just battles, the invisible friend of all those who, even in their littleness, feel that God is calling them to something great. In every church that bears her name, in every flag waved in her honor, in every woman fighting for her dignity, in every young person dreaming of changing the world, the echo of her story shines. And if one listens closely, among the cathedral stones in the silence of the fields, within the pages of old chronicles, one can still hear Joan's voice, sweet and firm, whispering to the soul of the world. Jesus, Jesus, never be afraid, for with him even the impossible becomes possible. The flame she lit was not extinguished at Rouen. It remains alive, illuminating the paths of all who, like her, dare to say yes when heaven calls. Saint Joan of Arc, brave maiden, warrior of God, banner of hope, pray for us.